This is the recording of my first learner who is in grade 5.
Salud in the Enchanted Forest by Richard Kula. One dark night, a voice as cold as the pouring rain woke Salud up from a deep slumber. The voice that reverberated through the thick woods was calling her through. She was neighbors. She called herself and followed the voice that was straight to her. Her pet carried her into a dense forest. Salud was astonished at the sign of Perez, writing in the shade of a large tree. She could not believe it. She saw barristers made of gold. The secret things we were also adorned with beautiful pearls and diamonds. The place was surrounded by a variety of flowers. Salud was surprised when someone had suddenly grabbed her shoulder. She was amazed to see a very handsome creature with a charming smile. He gave her a glass of drink and brought her in front of the crowd. Salud could not believe what was happening. All of a sudden, the fairies danced to the accompaniment of entertaining music. She was surprised when a trumpet had sounded as if a coronation was about to take place. When unexpectedly a fairy appeared from nowhere carrying a crown. The fairy happily placed the crown on Salud's head. After the crowing, the crown shouted, "Long live the Queen! Long live the Queen!" Salud's happiness was overflowing when suddenly she felt pain on her side. She recognized that someone was pinching her. She opened her eyes wildly and saw her mother's face. She then realized that she was just dreaming. Salud in the Enchanted Forest by Richard Kula.
The learner repeated the first syllable of salud. Also, he mispronounced forest as pores.
One dark night, a voice as cold
The learner mispronounced voice as voice.
as the pouring rain woke Salud up.
The learner mispronounced the words pouring as puring, woke as woke, salud as salod, and up as up.
From a deep slumber, the voice that reverberated through.
Voice is mispronounced again. The learner said voice for the second time. The learner mispronounced reverberated as reverberated, and he said through instead of through.
The thick woods was calling her through.
The learner mispronounced thick as thick, and though as true.
She was neighbors. She called herself.
The learner mispronounced nervous as neighbors, and calmed as calmed. Instead of saying herself, the learner said herself.
And followed the voice.
The learner mispronounced followed as followed. And for the third time, he mispronounced voice as voice.
That was straight to her.
The learner mispronounced strange as strength.
Her pet
The learner said pet instead of feet.
carried her into a dense forest.
The learner said dense instead of dense. And again, he mispronounced forest as forest.
Salud was astonished at the sign of Perez.
The learner mispronounced the words astonished as astonished, sight as sign, and fairies as Perez.
Writing in the shade of a large tree.
The learner said writing instead of partying. Also, he mispronounced of as up.
She could not believe it.
The learner mispronounced could as called. And instead of saying believe, he said believe.
She saw viruses.
The learner mispronounced the words saw as saw, various as virus, and tools as tools.
Made of gold, the secreting things we are.
The learner mispronounced surroundings as secretindings, and instead of saying were, the learner said we are.
Also adorned with beautiful.
The learner mispronounced adorned as adorned, and he substituted with which.
Pearls and diamond.
The learner omitted the letter S in diamonds.
The place was surrounded by a variety of flowers.
The learner mispronounced surrounded as surrented and variety as variety. The learner also said flowers instead of flowers.
Salud was surprised when someone.
The learner mispronounced the words surprised as surprise, omitting the d sound, and someone as someone.
Had sadly grabbed her shoulder.
The learner said sadly instead of suddenly. Also, he read grabbed as grabbed and shoulder as shoulder.
She was amazed to see
The learner mispronounced amazed as amazed.
a very handsome creature which a.
The learner mispronounced handsome as handsome. And again, he substituted with which.
Charming slime.
The learner said slime instead of smile. This is also a case of reversal which happened with the second and fourth letters.
He gave her a glass of drink and brought her in front of the crowd.
The learner mispronounced broth as brown and front as front. The learner also said up instead of and crone instead of crowd.
Salud could not believe
The learner mispronounced again the words could as cold and believe as believe.
what was happening all of a sudden.
For the third time, the learner mispronounced of as up, and he said sudden instead of sudden.
The fairies danced to the accompaniment.
The learner mispronounced danced as dance, omitting the final D. He also mispronounced accompaniment as accompaniment.
Of entertaining music.
The learner mispronounced entertaining as enter may raining.
She was surprised
Surprised is mispronounced again by the learner. He said surprise for the second time, omitting the final D.
when a trumpet had sounded
The learner mispronounced the word sounded as sounded.
as if a coronation was about to take place when unexpectedly appeared.
The learner initially said one and then unsuccessfully corrected himself since he said unexpectedly in the second attempt. Also, the learner mispronounced fairy as pairy and appeared as appeared.
From now her
The learner mispronounced knower as know her.
carrying a crown the fairy.
The learner said crone instead of crown. Fairy is mispronounced again by the learner since he said pairy.
Happily placed the crown
The learner mispronounced placed as placed and crown as crown.
on salad head.
The learner omitted the apostrophe s in saludes.
After the crowing,
The learner mispronounced after as after and crowning as crowning.
the crown shorter
The learner said crowed instead of crowd and shouter instead of shouted.
long. Live the queen, long live the queen.
The learner mispronounced live as live twice.
Salus happiness was
The learner omitted the letter D in salute and he mispronounced happiness as happiness.
overflowing when suddenly
The learner mispronounced overflowing as overplowing and suddenly as suddenly.
she felt pain on her side. She
The learner said side instead of side.
recognized that someone was pinching her.
The learner mispronounced recognized as recognized.
She opened her eyes wildly and saw
The learner mispronounced opened as open, omitting the final ed. Also, he mispronounced widely as windily and saw as saw.
her mother face.
The learner did not include the apostrophe s in mothers.
She then realized that she was just dreaming.
The learner mispronounced realized as realized and just as jussing.